Well, well, well. Today, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, a new supplemental book for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, has officially gone public, November 17th. And we immediately have a Polygon article giving its very brief review of the content and focusing on the only thing that they actually care about right here in the title of the article. Tasha's Cauldron makes D&D a better game, but whiffs on race changes. Because, of course, leave it to Polygon to make a big issue out of a non-issue that the vast majority of players of D&D really have never cared about. In fact, the racial diversity and the specific differences between the races have always been something that is attracting to players in Dungeons & Dragons. That rich sort of deep backstory, the rich lore, the differences in play that the races can provide, and the interesting and unique things they bring to the game are what makes it such a cool property. It's not a negative to have different fantasy races be different, yet Polygon is so engrossed in this weird race bait culture in the present real world that they must extend it into the other, into whatever other it is. It doesn't matter if that other is movies, TV, whatever. Escapism cannot be escape from Polygon's very severe issues about race, which tells me a lot about the people at Polygon, and none of it is good. None of it is good, okay? The irony of this whole thing is that this article praises the book on basically all of the content except for the one feature. But this is D&D. The penultimate rule. Dungeon Master's rules go. It's a set of guidelines that are there to be followed. And if you follow them strictly, you have a well-crafted, very highly tailored game to deliver a good experience to basically anybody who walks up at the table. And D&D core rules should be seen as kind of a vanilla experience that anyone can go up to. But they have homebrew for everything, and you don't even need someone else's homebrew kit. You could change whatever rule you want at any time if you're the dungeon master. There's no reason to demand that they do something for you, because you can just do it yourself in whatever way you feel is appropriate. And that's how you should approach the game, actually. House rules are a part of basically every D&D table experience, because the rules do leave some wiggle room for interpretation. Even in the strictest readings of them, there's wiggle room for interpretation. Occasionally, a DM is going to have to go, okay, I get it, but this is ridiculous. And this created a situation that is game-breaking or is not sufficient, and they have to modify something. It's going to come up in basically every session at some point, or someone's going to go, doesn't the rule say this? And then they have to decide whether the rule says that or not. So homebrew is a part of it, interpretation is a part of it, and there's no reason for making a big deal out of this. One final point about the title. The title originally said, Tasha's Cauldron feels a little thin. I guess Polygon saw that as maybe discriminatory or body-shaming language or something, and then they decided that they better just go ahead and talk about what makes it important, which is the race changes. So before anybody comes at me, criticizes me on how many words they spend on race, they chose intentionally to focus on the race changes as their issue. Let's take a quick look. There's a new supplement for D&D titled Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. The brand new content, including new subclasses for virtually every class in the game, expanded rules for sidekicks, and a collection of in-fiction puzzles is very, very good indeed. However, the overall package feels too thin. Not only is there a decent bit of material that's been reprinted, the much anticipated changes to the way the game handles race still leave something to be desired. Does it though? Does it really? I don't think so. Unless they didn't do anything new with races at all, it wouldn't leave anything to be desired. Because again, the diversity that D&D has brought to the table through decades and decades of crafting a very carefully racially balanced and racially interesting fantasy universe is what brings players to it and what gives players ideas about how these different things go and encourages players to step out of making a character that looks like them. D&D has maybe done more for exploring racial diversity amongst a particular subculture than just about anything ever. But Polygon and people like Polygon don't want you to explore racial diversity. They want, let's be honest, racial segregation in very real ways. They want all races put into specific lanes. Those lanes just have to be the same, so they're all boring. So you only make a character that looks like you, rather than making a character that looks like anything else. Tasha's Cauldron is part of a series of newly styled D&D sourcebooks, which began with Volo's Guide to Monsters in 2016, and also includes essential volumes like Xanathar's Guide to Everything and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Each one is narrated through marginal annotations from famous characters in the lore of D&D. Blah, blah, blah. This is all boring. They talk about the new subclasses for everybody. Kind of whines about not having enough Artificer stuff, but that's okay. Artificer is a new class. They talk about Chapter 2. It's a boon for Dungeon Masters, scrounging for story hooks. So here's some campaign hooks. Here's how you get your characters into it. All good stuff for D&D players and DMs alike. And then we've got a ton of new spells and magic items. New section specifically for DMs. Here's where the really good stuff is, in my opinion. So all this new content, but let's talk about the really good stuff. Session 0. Which is where those running the game have the opportunity to sit down with their players and discuss the social contract that will exist between them all during the game. It covers such topics as lines and veils, as well as setting expectations for good behavior. Remember, these people are so unhinged that they can't sit down and have comfortable experiences with people around them without pre-gaming a giant list of rules and guidelines to follow. They're so socially maladjusted and so awful to be around that you can't just sit down and play a game with them because they need a list of guidelines as to how to be in their own friend group. Think about how weird that is. Like, how many of you, when you're going to sit down with your friends and you're like, okay, let's set the guidelines for this game. All right. We don't want anybody getting assaulted by someone of the opposite gender. Only same genders can fight. Because if it's opposite, then the power dynamic, blah, 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 blah. Of course, focusing very much on the differences between genders while they would want you to believe otherwise. But anyway, this is a hypothetical. It's ridiculous. Most people can't even fathom what this looks like. So they had to write a section for it to appease people like the author of this article. It's only a few pages long, but it's one of the better discussions of the topic I've ever seen in a mainstream role-playing game. That's because they don't have discussions of this topic, because most people sit down at a table and just have fun. They just have fun. And if you accidentally step over a line with someone that you're playing a game with, you probably are okay anyway. Unless you're being recorded on YouTube and then you have to make your apologies for your robot assault or whatever it was. Publisher Wizards of the Coast should do what it can to make sure this exact content makes its way into both the existing 5th edition of the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master Guide, and makes it freely available online with all of its other introductory materials that it offers for new players. Listen to this. They better make this section free. They have to. It's the only important section. They need to do it. Sure, toots. All right, I'm going to skip this section on sidekicks. And you can check that out if you want. I don't really care. Let's get to their closing point. My only real disappointment with the book is the way it handles optional rules for dealing with the concept of race. Earlier this year, the publisher admitted that it had made missteps involving its portrayal of race in the past. Remember, these people forced Wizards of the Coast to cave to their deluded thinking that orcs are black people. Not Wizards of the Coast thinking that orcs are black people, but crazy people on social media decided that orcs are black people. Mind-blowing to me, the level of racism involved in that thinking, but that's what they did. And so then they forced Wizards of the Coast to make its prostrated, kneeling apologies, to all of the people who don't really care about their game. And then because of that, now Now we have this, and it's never good enough. It never has been. It never will be. They vowed to make changes to the structure of D&D to make it more welcoming and more flexible. Those changes, as detailed in Tasha's Cauldron, are extremely weak. The guidance is more or less to ignore the rules for character creation, do what feels right. That's good advice for every player and every DM regardless of the situation. Then what's the problem? But it falls well short of establishing a progressive new precedent for the original role-playing game. Maybe because they shouldn't. They have a product that's worked for decades. They shouldn't set a progressive new precedent. They should keep making what works and what the overwhelming majority of players want. That's it. That's the end of this story. There's nothing else to read. It's ridiculous. I will be buying Tasha's Cauldron of everything as soon as I can get up to a store that has it or get one shipped to me. And I will be reviewing the content inside as part of a new push on the media channel to review existing content in the world of escapism and bring it to you guys. So I hope you enjoy that. If you like this type of stuff, there will have social commentary videos as well as review and escapism videos coming more and more over the next several weeks. So if you like it, go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe, share it so people see it, and I will see you soon. All right, guys, have a good day. Peace. Peace.